everybody, and welcome to this week's coaching video for those of you leading a small group through Dayspring's ministry. The video you're watching is for those of you who lead an off-campus small group, meaning that you're not a Sunday morning teacher, but you facilitate an adult small group in your home during the week. This video is for you and is designed to help coach you through the discussion guide you're going to be using. So if you've got your discussion guide, you should have it. It's the one that'll be in the bulletin on Sunday, November the 10th, the one that goes along with that sermon. Get that in front of you, get something to write with, and block out about 15 minutes of time. I'm going to spend this with you, and I'm going to walk you through the handout. And again, the intent is that this will make it easier for you to facilitate your small group time. So let's just dive right in. You've got 7 discussion points on this week's discussion guide, and I'm just going to talk you through each one at a time, all right? Discussion point number 1, check it out. It says, read Psalm 23, then discuss what you heard or saw on Sunday. Psalm 23 is going to be the passage that's taught through, and you should have plenty of things to discuss coming out of this sermon. In fact, this is one of those weeks where that first question, discuss what you heard, discuss what you took from the message, this may be one of those weeks where you can spend about a third of your entire time just discussing and rehashing what you walked away with. So here's what I would encourage you to do as the one facilitating this group time. Be sure to take good notes on Sunday, okay? Write down as much as you can. That'll give you time to really weed through it before your small group time. And it may be that when you start this small group, like any other time, when you say, hey, let's talk about what we heard Sunday, it very likely may be that you're the one who has to get the ball rolling. You know, somebody forgot to bring their notes, somebody didn't take notes, all that kind of stuff. So you take really good notes, you have them available so that you can get discussion point number 1 going, and that way maybe people can be reminded what they heard and those sorts of things, all right? So that's the first part. You're just kind of recapping what you heard out of Psalm 23. Talks about our great shepherd king, and hopefully you have plenty to discuss there, all right? Discussion point number 2, look at this one. It says, have different people from your group complete one of these statements and then have them explain why they fill in the blank the way they do. One of the 2 blanks, either number 1, the great thing about Jesus being my shepherd is, then you fill in that, or number 2, the great thing about Jesus being my king is, and then you fill in the blank. And again, this should all make complete sense in light of the sermon. But what you will probably need to do here is give people time to think it through. You know, it's not like you're going to move to discussion point number 2 and then boom, immediately people are going to start filling in the blanks. Give them time to think at it. So if I were facilitating this, this is how I would do it. I would say, look at discussion point number 2 here, and just look at those 2 statements. And as an answer comes to your mind, just say it out loud. And then if somebody says something out loud, then just follow up by saying, hey, explain why you say that, all right? So allow some time here for some silence. That's okay. As people look at the statement in front of them and think about it, then eventually somebody starts speaking. And again, I would encourage you to be prepared to at least have an answer for each of those. Again, you may be the one that has to kind of break the ice here. So that's discussion points 1 and 2. Those are both strictly follow up to the message from Sunday. So people should have a good point of reference to get started. Now, discussion point number 3. This is the gist of this discussion that you're leading, all right? Discussion point number 3 kind of gets you to the point of where you're trying to go. Look at what it says. It says, sometimes it's easier to take more delight in what the shepherd can give than the shepherd himself, isn't it? And then it asks this question. Have you ever felt like someone was simply using you as a means to another end? And if so, how did that make you feel? Now, here's a pointer here. You want to focus more on the second part of that question than the first part of it. In other words, if somebody's ever felt like somebody was just using them before, what you're wanting them to focus on and discuss here is more, how does that make you feel? Not the specific situation itself, okay? So this isn't a time where you're just kind of getting people to unload all their baggage and, you know, to talk about Susie at work or so-and-so or their ex-husband or whatever. You're not wanting them to get into those details. You're just simply wanting to point out, how does it make you feel when somebody really is using you just really to get something else, you know, out of you, out of having a relationship with you. So that's really what you're wanting to get at. And obviously the point is, it doesn't feel good. Nobody likes to be treated that way because it devalues you in the sense that it makes you feel less valuable than this other thing, because people don't really want you. They want that other thing, and they see you as a means to that end. So this is really what you're getting at here. How does it make you feel when you become simply the means to an end? Well, obviously nobody likes that. And you see the end of the discussion point there at number 3. It says, what are some ways that we tend to do the same thing with Jesus, our shepherd king? Boy, there are times that we just kind of come to Jesus or approach Jesus because of what we can get out of him, right? I mean, if we're all being honest, this happens. Something's going wrong at work, so we begin to all of a sudden get closer to Jesus because we want things to get better at work. Or we've got this family situation, and all of a sudden, that's when all of a sudden we start calling on Jesus or doing things for Jesus. So really the whole point here in discussion point number 3 is just to help us be aware of the fact that sometimes we don't see the shepherd himself, Jesus, as our prize. Relationship with God is the prize. Sometimes we don't see it that way. We see it more as what we get out of him and what he does for us. Sometimes that becomes the most important thing in our relationship with God. And the whole point here is, just as it doesn't feel good for us to be treated that way, certainly God doesn't take delight in us approaching him that way. So that's really the heart of the matter. Now, that brings you to a passage that you're going to look at that will help you explore that a little bit. Look at discussion point number 4. This is your main passage for this lesson. It says, read Mark chapter 8, verses 27 through 28. And this passage is one where Jesus asks his disciples, basically, who do people say I am? What's the word on the street out there? And then the disciples give Jesus an answer. They say, well, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, some say, some of the other prophets, but this is who people are saying that you are. Now, you're going to read that. You're going to have somebody read that. Now, look at the discussion that happens after you read that passage. Again, on discussion point number 4 here. It says, if you think about those various answers, they can be classified as the following. That Jesus is either a mere man, he's John, he's Elijah, some other mere man, or Jesus is a precursor to something better. So when Jesus said, who do people say I am out there? Well, they say you're just another man, another mere man, or they say you're someone who's come along because something better is coming down the tracks. So that's who people were saying Jesus was, either just a man or a precursor to something better. And look at the question there at the end of that. Which of those descriptions would you find more troublesome if you were Jesus? What would bother you more? For people just to be treating you like you're just another mere man, or for people to be treating you like you are a means to something better? See the connection here with what we've already discussed? This is kind of how people were approaching Jesus. And just kind of a side note here, this may be just, extra discussion that you may throw in. It's interesting to me where this whole discussion takes place with Jesus and the disciples in an area called Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi was a grab bag of religious thought. In this town there were some people who, Caesar himself was worshipped. Thus the name Caesarea Philippi, the city was named after Caesar, really is a, kind of a way to kind of brown nose with him. But people still worship Caesar as Lord and saw him as a god. So here's a town where Caesar is worshipped as Lord. The Greek god Pan was worshipped there, and there was a whole lot that went on with him. The Baal of the Old Testament, B-A-A-L, Baal was still worshipped in these parts. So when you think about this area, here's a place where a lot of different deities are being worshipped and honored and lived for. I think it's interesting that Jesus chose this spot to really identify himself to the disciples. And that's probably a different discussion for a different time, but I think that's interesting. And you may even throw that out. Why do you think Jesus chose such a confused place to let his disciples know who he actually was? Or why do you think he chose such a confused place to have them verbalize who he was? That's really not part of your handout. Maybe another discussion for another time, but it may fit in with what you guys are talking about. So discussion point number 4. You look at the question Jesus asked, who do people say I am? And then you see some of these responses that kind of show how people were looking at Jesus or approaching Jesus in that area. Now this brings you to discussion point number 5. Now you're going to read verse 29, and this is where Jesus now turns and says, but who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? And the way Jesus words this statement in the Greek language that Mark records it for us, there's an emphatic part of this sentence, an emphasis, an underlined or italicized word. Who do you say I am? That's the part that Jesus is emphasizing here. In other words, I know how other people are relating to me. I know how other people are treating me. But how are you going to relate to me? Who do you say I am? And of course, Simon Peter speaks up and says, you are the Christ. And by the way, the word Christ is just another word for Messiah. It's the same exact word, just spoken in two languages, okay? So Simon Peter says, we know who they say you are, that you're just another man, or that you're a means to something better. I say that you are it, that you are the prize, you are the goal, that you are the Messiah. So here's the whole point of discussion point number 5. Look at it. It says, this is a reminder that Jesus wants us to relate to him personally and as more than just a means to something else. So that's kind of the whole point here of this discussion, is that we've got to quit looking to Jesus as just a way to get what we want. That's not the right way to relate to him. We've got to quit looking to him as a shepherd just because we want all the good stuff a shepherd can do for us, or quit looking to him as a king just because of all the things that a king can do for us. The reality is there are some people who, if you talked about heaven, and if you said, heaven, everything's going to be what you've envisioned, except Jesus isn't actually going to be there. But all the other stuff that you ever thought about being in heaven, that stuff's going to be there. There are some people who, if they're being honest, would say, well, I guess it's still a good deal. And if we can think about something like heaven without Jesus physically being there in our midst and be satisfied with that, we're not taking delight in Jesus, but rather the stuff that we can get from him. So that's what this lesson is all about. It's helping us recalibrate how we approach Jesus, how we see him, how we prize him above all other things. Look at discussion point number 6. This is just kind of a discussion thing that kind of helps to round it all out. Corrie ten Boom, a Christian who helped countless Jews escape the Nazi Holocaust, she wrote these words. Look at this. You can never learn that Christ is all you need until Christ is all you have. And then it gives you some follow-up there that you can talk about. And then last but not least, discussion point number 7. It says, now finally, read Matthew chapter 6, verses 25 through 33, and read that through the lens of our discussion. So read it through our lens of us wanting Jesus, not just his stuff, and pursuing him, not just the things that we get from him. Read that passage through that lens. And this is the passage that talks about how we really don't need to worry about what we're going to eat, what we're going to wear, that Jesus takes care of the birds of the air and the flowers of the field and all of that. But here's what ought to catch your attention. And this is what hopefully your group will latch onto. If they don't, help them latch onto it. But the very last verse of what you're going to read is where it says, but seek first the kingdom. And really the emphasis there is the king himself. Seek first the king and his kingdom. And let all of that other stuff become what? Secondary. So let Jesus be primary, and let our relationship with him, with the person of Jesus, let that be primary. Let all the other stuff be secondary. So I hope that this group discussion, I hope it really clicks and makes sense with your group. I hope that as we think about pursuing Jesus and seeing him himself as our prize and as the thing that we cherish, having a shepherd who we love and who loves us, I hope that it really clicks with your group that sometimes we view him a little bit of in a skewed way, to where we see him as a means to an end. And hopefully this will foster our desire and our appetite to desire him above all things. All right? Well, I hope this has helped you. I hope as you go through your discussion with your group, I hope this has made it a little bit easier for you. God bless you, and we'll see you Sunday.